Hey there, and welcome back to another My Hero Academia review. And today we're going to be talking about the latest episode to drop, episode 17, The Wrong Way to Put Out a Fire, which chronicles the majority of Dabi's backstory and his fall into villainy. And yeah, this episode is deeply depressing, and is ultimately the culmination of Endeavor's arc to try and atone for his actions. It's a really powerful episode, and goes to show that if anybody in the story needs extreme therapy, it's the Todoroki clan. But yeah, before we go any further, I would like to say that I have read the manga, and I'm aware of any relevant future plot points and details, but for the purpose of these reviews, I only like to talk about things from an anime-only perspective, so that anime-only fans can watch along and join in too. And so with all that being said, let's jump into the episode. We start off the episode with a deeply depressing scene where Endeavor's approached Rei's family with an offer of marriage, as he wants access to their ice quirk in order to try and produce a child with the best possible genetics to surpass All Might. Since quirk marriages were outlawed at that time, because, it feels like that would have led to a hell of a lot of human trafficking, it's made to look like an arranged marriage instead, with the context of everything made even worse by the fact that her family, which was once notable and prestigious, had fallen into obscurity and relative poverty, and thus they needed the money and the prestige. And so her father accepts on her behalf, and Rei doesn't kick up a fuss, even though she clearly does not want to do this. And then there was an interesting line from Endeavor. He says that she could have refused. I think he still has a bit of his journey to becoming a better man to walk down. Because it's clear to me, at least, that she did not have a choice. Imagine what would have happened to her if she said no. She would have been out on the street, out on her ass. Her family would have just abandoned her straight up, I guarantee. And so to me, this whole marriage reeks of coercion and marital rape. Ugh. Although if he ever had that realization, I'm not sure how he could ever possibly live with the guilt. So right now I feel like living in denial is the only way forward for him to exist. But hey, he remembered at least that she likes those blue flowers, so it must be all good, right? Right? Ugh. This whole sequence did give me the heebie-jeebies. And so then, it's back to the present, where after asking Rei whether she's alright, she responds to Endeavor that she's clearly not alright, because she has the same guilt about Toya's fate that Endeavor has, which, well yeah, I'm sure she feels guilty, but having already watched the episode before, it's so clearly his fault and not her fault. But guilt is guilt, I guess. Anyway, the intro plays and we go to the prodigal son himself, Toya, who's just chilling in some house thinking about his life. His quirks damaged him to the point that he can no longer feel anything, which is depressing. And my god, for somebody whose skin is held on by staples and has been on the run and probably doesn't care about working out and doesn't eat enough, the dude's shredded. Although I guess this is anime land. And then he thinks about how it's unlikely that his dad died from his injuries. Imagine if he had though. Dabi would be salty. I also found it interesting that beyond him thinking that Endeavor just wouldn't allow himself to die because he's the number one hero, he's also just certain he wouldn't have died because he's his dad. So clearly, there's still some sort of respect lingering in there. Therapist's field day, honestly. He then talks about how long it's taken to get to this point, and he thinks about his family. He uses his dad's full name because, he hates him. And then his siblings' names, and he says mum. So obviously, whilst he's still got that separation from Endeavor, he still somewhat views his mum as his mum, despite his actions in the flashbacks. And at the same time, he wants his family to see him, to look at him, to care about what he's doing. And then he starts crying blood, so yeah, he's got a lot of shit he needs to unpack, I think. We then move on to a flashback of Toya's childhood, back when he was a little boy, just after Endeavor noticed that his quirk had severe backlash and would burn him. And Toya throws a cute little tantrum about not being able to train with his dad, even though it's his day off. And that's what they usually do on Endeavor's days off. Instead, Endeavor and his wife go to the doctor, and thankfully it's not Deku's childhood doctor, where they learn that whilst he has a superpowered version of Endeavor's quirk, he also lacks his natural resistance to flame. And instead, he has his mother's ice resistance, which in turn causes a pretty dangerous mismatch. The doc then scolds him for wanting to design a baby, and he sends him on his way. And instead of being hugely upset that Toya's dreams would be crushed, it kind of feels like he was more upset that he wouldn't be able to use him to surpass All Might. Moving on, we then see Toya, with more burns and much more white hair, watching All Might on TV and complaining to Fuyumi about how their dad won't let him train anymore because of his injuries. And already, he's showing some pretty bad tendencies. As when his sister tells him that she doesn't want him to get hurt, he yells at her about how she could never understand. Not because she didn't have the training, but because she's a girl. Whoops. And all because his father lit that fire underneath him to be the greatest of all time. Meanwhile, Endeavor's reached his limit. He needs new children that can do what Toya can't, so that his dreams will be crushed and he'll give it up. to try and make him less self-destructive and get him to move on with his life. And obviously, this is a very terrible plan, as Rei says it is, but regardless, what Endeavor says goes. And so, Natsuo's born, and then when he fails to have the desired traits, an increasingly erratic Endeavor gets his wife pregnant again. And my god, she does not look enthusiastic here. Whew. Anyway, the kid's born, Endeavor's hyped, Rei looks thankful and worn out, and Toya looks broken, and it's made even more heartbreaking by the fact that he still goes out and trains, but he doesn't feel seen. He doesn't feel loved. He just wants his dad to spend time with him, to notice him. I'm starting to think that maybe Endeavor should not have been a father. He ruined one child completely, and the other three are good in spite of him. Yeah, quite obviously, Toya does not react well to being rejected once again for the perfect child, and he goes nuts and tries to attack baby Shoto, which only results in Shoto getting isolated from his siblings, whilst Rei's put on Toya watch, even though he clearly needs his dad to give him some love and attention again. Anyway, we then time skip and we see Toya and his siblings a little bit older, and we see that scene where they're playing ball outside from a different perspective. I know it's really because the animators didn't know he had white hair at the time, but I find it interesting that Shoto's memories have him with red hair, and yet the actual memories have him with white hair. Probably because he hardly remembers him, and he knew that he had a fire quirk, so I guess he just filled in his hair as red, just like his dad's, who also had a fire quirk. Anyway, from this whole sequence, it really goes to show just how bad things have gotten. He's obsessed with talking about how his dad's abandoned him and his siblings. And yet, he keeps on going to train on the mountain regardless to try and impress him. And plus, he vents all his problems to his 8-year-old brother, and on top of that, he seems to hate women, or at least the women in his family, calling them useless, and then yelling at his mother, who seems to be on the verge of a full-on mental breakdown at this point, and blaming her for his being born, even though he outright states in that sentence that she had no choice in anything at all and was essentially sold off to the highest bidder. At the same time, he also develops his blue flames, and thinking that this would impress his dad, he tells him about them. But this simply makes him angry and causes him to start physically abusing Rei, if that hadn't started already. Anyway, Toya then leaves this conversation all hyped up, expecting that his dad's actually going to come see him practice next time, whilst Endeavor's just steaming mad, and there's a deeply uncomfortable abuse scene where all the kids are huddling and listening to him beat her and scream at her, while Shoto tries in vain to protect her. Ugh. And yeah, then her mental breakdown comes about, and you know what, fair enough. She's been abused and is watching her son succumb to mental illness, unable to reach him. All the while, her middle children are being neglected, and her youngest is being physically abused through intense training. Surprised she made it that far, to be honest. Also, I found it quite sad that when she burns Shoto, it wasn't just because he looked like Endeavor, but also like Toya. That's just tragic. And then she's sent to the hospital to be kept in isolation for a time, which makes me think that she was supposed to be there temporarily to be eventually released. But then Toya supposedly died and her mind just snapped. And yeah, once again, fair enough. Also, poor Toya burns all alone on the mountain waiting for his dad. That whole scene was so heartbreaking. But then back in the present, all of the Todoroki clan, except Shoto, try to take responsibility for Toya, as if it's the fault of the battered wife and the 2 children that were neglected, and that they should have all been able to help him. No, I don't think so. I'm not sure I like the direction that this is going, in all honesty. It is actually 100% Endeavor's fault. But okay, moving on, Hawks and Best Jeanist come in, and after a humorous moment where Rei of all people tries to apologise to Hawks for Dabi trying to turn him into KFC, they propose that the 3 heroes all team up for the duration of the crisis. I also found it interesting to see Hawks reflect on Shoto seemingly coming to terms with his parents after enduring abuse from both of them, which makes him think of his own inability to confront his parents for their mistakes, which in turn seems to turn him into a Shoto fanboy. And look, I get it. I too am a Shoto fanboy. And then they get down to the details. Heaps of the main League of Villains characters, they're free. There's 7 near high-end Nomu that are free. 132 League of Villains minor members, and 10,000 extra escaped convicts are running wild whilst the heroes are quitting en masse, and vigilantes are popping up all over, causing chaos. Plus, they no longer have the hero commission because Redestro killed most of them, so there's nobody to unite behind and no aid from outside the country is coming, as without the commission the paperwork can't be filed properly. Whew, it's a disaster, isn't it? And so, after Endeavor has a bit of a cry, the team go into PR mode and plan their next move. They realise that they need to give a press conference because there's a lot of shit to explain after Dabi's broadcast. But the foremost question is this: what is One for All? All Endeavor knows is that it relates to Deku, and that it was the reason that Shigaraki was chasing after him. And then Hawks puts together that All Might is with Deku, so it's clear that the secret's almost out of the bag now. Probably not next episode, as we finish with All Might speculating that Deku's talking to the Vestiges at this point. And indeed, we do see in the preview that it focuses entirely on the Vestige realm. So I think next episode, the revelation's for Deku at first, and then the others can find out about it in a couple of episodes' time. But yeah, that's the end of the video, end of the episode, end of the review. And I would like to say that these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? You like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.